4 seconds. That's how long my right hand was on that grill. I know the number because I counted it later, off a neighbor's video, frame by frame. 4 seconds at 480 degrees. But it wasn't 4 seconds of burning. It was 4 seconds of my daughter finishing her sentence. She didn't scream. She didn't reach for a towel. She stood 8 feet away with a plastic cup in her hand and finished what she was saying. Every word. Every look. Every time she said the word selfish a little louder so the back tables could hear. All of it was aimed at one thing. Reminding 40 people that in the building my wife owned for 32 years, I was the problem. I didn't shout. I didn't press charges. I didn't argue with the police officer when my own daughter told him I was confused and on pain medication. I told him it was an accident. I told my son-in-law I was sorry. I told him he was right, that I'd been selfish, and I signed the papers he brought to my room. 2 of them, not the third. And then I waited. I waited for 9 days at the end of July, when the 2 of them sat in a law office in Dallas with their phones in a plastic tray outside the door. 9 days when neither one of them could answer a call. That's all I needed. I made 3 of them. The first one took 4 minutes. The third one took the building. 6 weeks later, on the first Tuesday in September, I stood on the south steps of the McLennan County Courthouse in Waco, Texas, and I bought back the room my wife baked in. I paid $11 more than I had to. I'll tell you why later. If you're watching this, tell me in the comments what town you're in. I like knowing who's out there. And if you've ever signed a piece of paper for one of your children because you love them, and not because you read it twice, hit like and subscribe. Because this whole story turns on one page nobody read. My name is Warren Osgood. I'm 71 years old. For 41 years, I worked property and casualty claims for Calder Mutual, almost all of it fire loss. That means I spent 4 decades walking into burned kitchens with a flashlight and a clipboard, finding out where a fire started and whether anybody was going to get paid. I can look at a scorched ceiling tile and tell you whether it was grease or wiring. I got my CPCU in 1988. My wife made me hang the certificate in the hallway, where nobody would see it, because that's where I asked her to put it. Her name was Lorna. She died in February of 2023, at home, on a Tuesday afternoon. The last thing she ever asked me was whether I'd remembered the baking powder. My house on Bosque Boulevard is paid off. $218,000, no note against it. Write that number down. It comes back. Now the gift. In 1979, Lorna signed a lease on a 2-story brick building at 1114 Franklin Avenue and opened Osgood's Bakery. 4,200 square feet, tin ceiling, 1 oven she named after her mother. She bought the place outright in 1986. She stood in that room for 32 years, and she closed it in 2011 because her hands stopped holding a piping bag. For 4 years after that, the windows stayed papered over with butcher paper she cut herself. In August of 2015, my daughter Marlene came to the house with her husband, Trent Boyle, and a plan for a barbecue restaurant. Trent had run the competition circuit for 6 years. He could talk about smoke the way a preacher talks about grace, and you'd get hungry listening to him. I'll say this for him, and then I'll say nothing kind about him again. He was good at it. In 11 years, I never once heard him say the word bakery. Lorna sat at our kitchen table with both hands around a coffee cup, and she listened to him for about 20 minutes, and then she said, "Warren, give them the building." So I did. On August the 14th, 2015, at a title company on Austin Avenue, I signed 1114 Franklin over to Marlene and Trent Boyle. I wrote them a check for $28,000 on top of it, $14,000 to each of them. That was the annual exclusion that year, and I looked it up, because that is the kind of man I am. There was a stack of documents on that table. I slid them across one at a time and said, "Sign here." They signed here. Trent asked exactly one question that whole afternoon. He asked whether the parking easement in back was included. It was. Neither one of them read a page. Afterward, Trent set up an automatic transfer out of the restaurant account. $412, the first of every month. It has come in on the first of every month for 11 years. Marlene keeps the books. In the books, that line says, "Dad, taxes." Boyle's Smokehouse opened in the spring of 2016. The Tribune Herald wrote it up, and the article hangs framed by the register 10 feet from where Lorna's oven used to sit. They did well. They bought a house over on Castle Heights with a live oak in the front yard. My grandson Cody was born in 2017. For a few years, it looked exactly like the thing you hope for when you hand something over. Then, 3 weeks before the party, Trent came to my house on a Thursday night and asked me to mortgage Bosque Boulevard and hand him $200,000. He didn't say what for. He said it was a cash flow thing. He said those 3 words twice in about 90 seconds. When a man says the same 3 words to you twice, inside 2 minutes, he isn't describing a cash flow thing. I said no. I've spent a lot of nights since taking that no apart to see what was inside it. Whether I said it because it was the right answer, or because nobody had asked me for anything in 2 years, and it felt good to be the one holding the pen, I still don't have a clean answer for you. I'm going to tell you all of it anyway. July the 12th. A Sunday, 101 degrees at 4 in the afternoon, and the asphalt on Franklin was soft enough to take a heel print. I drove over with a cardboard box on the passenger seat, 300 of Lorna's recipe cards, in her handwriting, some of them with flour still worked into the corners. I'd been meaning to give them to Marlene for 3 years, and kept not doing it. I carried that box in through the front, past the framed article, and set it down on a folding table by the drink tubs. Trent saw me come in. He didn't say hello. He looked at the box, then at me, and pointed his chin at 4 bags of ice on the floor by the door. Since you're standing there. So that's what I did for the first 40 minutes of my daughter's reopening party. 71 years old, right knee that's been bone on bone since 2019, hauling ice tubs across a concrete floor in 101 degrees, in the room where my wife made wedding cakes for 32 years. 2 of the servers offered to help. Trent told them there was prep to do. I got the last tub set, and I straightened up, and my knee made a sound loud enough that a woman at the nearest table turned around. Nobody put a hand out. I wiped my face with my forearm and started toward the door to get some air. That's when my daughter called across the room. "Dad." I stopped. "One more thing." I turned around. Marlene was coming across the floor with her drink still in her hand. Trent came behind her, and he wasn't hurrying, and that told me they'd talked about this before I got there. She stopped about 4 feet away. "Have you thought about what Trent asked you?" I said, "I gave him my answer 3 weeks ago. He's asking again." "Then, my answer's the same." Trent stepped up beside her. Not in front of her. Beside her, shoulder to shoulder. The way you stand when you want somebody to see there are 2 of you. "Warren, it's a signature. It's a lien on my house. It's a signature," he said again. 200, 6 months, and you'd never feel it. I looked past him at the room. 40 people. Paper plates. The Tribune Herald article in its frame by the Register. I said, "Trent, let's go outside." He didn't move. "That's the thing I want you to hear." I gave him a door. I offered him the parking lot, and the hedge, and the whole back half of Franklin Avenue where nobody would have heard a word of it. He stayed exactly where he was. Because the room was the point. I said, "What's the money actually for?" And Marlene said it. "Dad, you're being selfish." She didn't shout it. I want to be fair about that. Because I've replayed it enough times to be fair about it. She said it at conversation volume. But she turned her chin maybe 15 degrees to her left when she said it. And that 15 degrees put the word out over the tables. The nearest 4 people stopped chewing. The ones behind them kept talking. 41 years of standing in other people's kitchens taught me to read a room in about a second and a half, and what I read was this. Half of them heard. Half of them didn't. And every single person in that yard was going to find out about it by Tuesday. I said, "That's not an answer, Marlene." I took a step back toward the door, and Trent put his hand between my shoulder blades. "Here is what I know about the next 4 seconds. And I know it the way I know 100 other people's 4 seconds. Because I got the video off a neighbor's phone 11 days later and I went through it frame by frame at my kitchen table. I went forward off my right foot. The Southern Pride was standing open with the lid up, which it should not have been, because they were holding at temp for the second round of brisket. My right hand came down flat on the grate, palm down, fingers spread, and the thermometer set into the underside of that lid was 8 inches from my eyes and it read 480. That's what I looked at, not my hand. The gauge. 41 years does that to a man. Something is happening to your body, and there's a piece of your brain still standing there with a clipboard, writing down the number. 4 seconds. Second-degree burns, palm and the inside of the forearm. Just under 2% of total body surface. and the burn ran crosswise, straight across the palm, perpendicular to the fingers. Remember that. It matters in about 20 minutes. I came off the grate and went down on one knee on the concrete. Somebody yelled. A woman started saying, oh my God," over and over. And from down there, with my ears full of my own heartbeat, I was looking at the doorframe into the kitchen. There was a nail in that doorframe, about 5 feet up. Hanging on it was a canvas oven mitt, dark from 30 years of use, with one corner scorched black and a letter L stitched into the cuff in green thread. Lorna sewed that L on herself in 1981 because a girl she hired kept walking off with it. I looked at that mitt for as long as it took 2 servers to get to me. Neither one of those servers was named Boyle. Trent got there before Marlene did. He crouched down and put a hand on my shoulder and said, loud for the room, "Whoa. Hey, easy, Warren." Loud enough for the back tables. Then, quieter, 6 inches from my ear, "You tripped." The officer's name was Reyes, Waco Police Department, and he showed up about 20 minutes later while a paramedic was wrapping my hand. He was maybe 32 and he was polite to me, and he had his notebook out. He asked what happened. And before I got 3 words out, Marlene was there. She had a prescription bottle in her hand, Norco 10 milligram filled at the Walgreens on Valley Mills on the 19th of May. She held it up so he could read the label, and she said, "He's on these, for his knee." Then she said the other thing. In April, he got turned around driving home. He was gone about 2 hours. We didn't want to make a thing out of it. That never happened. There was no April. I have never once been lost in the city of Waco, Texas, where I have lived since 1974, and I want you to sit with how strange it is to hear a person you raised invent a memory about you, out loud, to a police officer, in under 9 seconds. She didn't stumble on it. She had the dates, which means it wasn't invented on that concrete. It was invented somewhere with a table and 2 chairs, sometime before that Sunday, and it had been sitting there waiting for a use. Then Marlene cried, "I want to describe this correctly, because it's the part I got wrong for about a week." She didn't sob. She didn't put on a show. She got wet eyes, and she pressed the back of her wrist under one of them, and she apologized to Officer Reyes for taking up his time. She cried the way a woman cries when she's holding herself together in public for her father's sake. Reyes softened. Anybody would have. He clicked his pen closed. The report went into the system as accidental contact. No charges filed, and there's a line in it I've now read maybe 200 times. Complainant appeared confused and was unable to provide a consistent account. I never got to provide any account at all. He stopped asking. 2 things happened while the paramedics were loading me. The first was Dana, Trent's younger sister, 33. She runs the front of the house, and she keeps the books Marlene doesn't want to keep. She'd been standing in the kitchen doorway, under that nail, under that mitt, from about 4 seconds before Trent's hand touched my back until the ambulance doors closed. She never moved. She never said one word, but she was still holding a tray of cornbread straight out in front of her, like she'd forgotten she had arms. Nobody looks like that over an accident. The second thing happened in the ambulance. Marlene rode with me, and about a minute out she took a call, and she turned her face toward the window the way people do when they think that's enough. It isn't. Not in the back of a box truck at 25 miles an hour. She said 6 words. "It's fine. It's handled. He'll sign now." They gave me something for the pain at Ascension Providence, and I slept about 4 hours. When I woke up, it was dark, and my hand was in a pressure dressing, and there was nobody in the room. And I lay there, and I thought about the burn, crosswise, straight across the palm. I have sat at desks and written coverage denials over exactly this. A man says he tripped and caught himself on a hot surface, and I open the file and look at the pattern and I know he's lying, because a hand that catches you when you fall lands with the fingers pointing where you were going. The burn runs lengthwise, up the fingers, down the wrist. A crosswise burn means the palm went down flat and stayed there. Flat, level, held. That's not a fall. That's a hand being placed. I had 4 decades of proof written across my own right hand, and I couldn't get a police officer to finish 1 sentence with me, so I stopped trying to talk. They kept me 4 days at Ascension Providence. Debridement twice, pressure dressing, and a physical therapist named Angela who made me open and close that hand 90 times a day while I said words I hadn't said since the army. On Thursday the 16th, a discharge planner came in with a clipboard and told me the family had already made arrangements. That was the word she used. Arrangements. Cedar Ridge, out on Hewitt Drive, skilled nursing and rehab. I said I had a house. She said, and she was kind about it, that the file showed I lived alone and had use of one hand, and that my daughter had signed the referral on Tuesday. I'd been in that bed since Sunday night, so somebody made a phone call about where I was going to live while I was still asleep with my arm in a sling. I didn't argue. I want to be honest about why. Part of it was strategy, and I'll get to that. But most of it, that Thursday, was that I was 71 years old and tired and my hand hurt, and I did not have it in me to stand in a hallway and explain to a stranger with a clipboard that my own daughter was lying about me. Sometimes the reason you don't fight is not a reason at all. Sometimes you're just tired. Room 214. 2 beds, 1 empty. A window that looked at the parking lot and, past it, a Whataburger. 9 days. I want to tell you what 9 days in a place like that is actually like, because I think people picture something worse and something better at the same time. Breakfast at 7, therapy at 9, lunch at 11:30, which is not a mistake. That's when they serve it. Everybody there was decent to me. The aides were young and underpaid, and they called me Mr. Osgood, and they meant it. There was a man across the hall, 91, who had been a barber on Elm for 50 years, and on the 4th day he asked me if I could tell him what day of the week it was, and I told him, and he said thank you, and 11 minutes later he asked me again. That's what 9 days is like. It's not a horror movie. It's just a hallway where the world gets a little smaller every time somebody signs something on your behalf. On the 6th night I couldn't sleep. I got my phone off the tray table and I did the thing I do maybe 4 times a year. I have a voicemail saved from January of 2023. 19 seconds. Lorna, from the HEB parking lot, asking whether I'd gotten baking powder or whether she needed to go back in, and then telling me not to answer because she'd just buy it anyway. There's a car door in the background. You can hear her keys. She sounds fine. She sounds like a woman with about 6 weeks left, who has absolutely no idea, standing in a parking lot on a Tuesday, thinking about baking powder. I played it. Then I played it again. I played that 19 seconds 4 times in a row in the dark in room 214 with my right hand wrapped in a pressure dressing, and somewhere in there I stopped being a man building a case. 51 years. We got married in 1972. She was 21 and I was 22 and we had $400. She built a business out of a room with a tin ceiling, and she stood up in it for 32 years, and she never once asked me to hang her certificate anywhere either. I don't have a good way to say the next part, so I'll just say it. I have never in my life wanted to talk to somebody as badly as I wanted to talk to my wife at 2 a.m. in that room. Not for advice. I didn't want advice. I wanted to tell her that our daughter said a word in front of 40 people, and I wanted Lorna to be the one to decide what it meant, because she always knew, and I never did. I cried for a while. Not quietly. There's no quietly in a room with a hard floor. The night aide, a girl named Priya who couldn't have been 25, knocked and put her head in and asked if I needed anything. I said no, thank you. I'm all right. She stood there a second. Then she came in and refilled my water pitcher, which did not need refilling, and she straightened the blanket at the foot of the bed, and she turned the light off on her way out. They came on the 9th day, Tuesday the 21st, about 10 a.m, right after therapy, which meant they'd asked somebody about my schedule. Marlene brought a coffee she'd already drunk half of. Trent brought a folder, and behind them was a woman with a stamp and a logbook, a mobile notary, who introduced herself and then stood by the door and looked at her phone the entire time, the way you do when you're being paid to be in a room and not in it. Marlene sat on the edge of the bed. She said she was sorry. She said, "Dad, this has gotten out of hand." She reached over and put her hand on my leg through the blanket and she said, "Nobody meant for you to get hurt. Nobody meant. Not, we're sorry we hurt you. Nobody meant." There's no person in that sentence at all. I have read 10,000 claim narratives and I promise you, the sentence people build when they're arranging where the blame goes is a sentence with nobody in it. Trent opened the folder. "There's some housekeeping," he said, "while we've got the notary. 3 documents. The first was a medical power of attorney. He said it was so Marlene could talk to my doctors, which, he said, she'd already been doing anyway. The second was a statutory durable power of attorney, financial. He said it was so somebody could keep my utilities paid and handle the house while I was in here. The third one he was less casual about. He set it down last, and he kept 2 fingers on the corner of it. And this one's just cleanup, he said. Title company found some old paperwork from 2015 that never got closed out. Release of lien. It's a formality. It's been sitting on the property this whole time. Release of lien. He said those 3 words the way a man says the name of a street he's driven for years without ever once wondering who it was named after. Now, I want you to understand what was in front of me on that blanket, because everything after this is that. I understood 2 things at the same time, and they arrived about a half-second apart. The first was that they were going to put me in a memory care unit and sell my house, and the power of attorney was the shovel. The second one was better. The second one was that Trent Boyle had just handed me a piece of paper and told me it was nothing. I have spent 41 years around men who are very confident about documents they have not read. I signed the first 2, left-handed, because my right was wrapped. The signature came out like a child's. The notary stamped both and wrote them in her book. Then Trent slid the third one over, and I picked it up in my left hand and looked at it, and I let my hand shake a little more than it needed to, and I said, "This one's a deed. A deed needs my real signature." I held up the dressing. "Bring it back when this comes off." There was a pause of about 2 seconds, and then Trent said, "Sure. Yeah. No rush. No rush." The man had a foreclosure sale and a lawsuit, and a hard money note at 22% standing on his neck, and he said no rush, and he smiled at me. That's when I knew he had no idea what that document was either. He thought it was a stale lien, old paper, a box to tick before his refinance could close. He never once wondered why a lien might still be sitting on a property 11 years after a man supposedly gave it away. Then I did the last thing. I said, "Marlene." She turned around at the door. I said, "I've been thinking about what you said at the party." And I told my daughter that she was right. I told her I'd been selfish, that I'd been sitting on things and holding on to them and calling it being careful. I said I was sorry, and I asked her to tell Trent I was sorry too. She came back and hugged me. She held on for a good 5 seconds, and I could feel her actually let go of something in her shoulders. And I want you to know that I hated every part of that hug, and that I hugged her back, and that both of those are true. They walked out. The door didn't latch all the way, and about 8 feet down that hallway, I heard Trent laugh. Not a mean laugh. That's what got me. It was a light, relieved, ordinary laugh. The laugh of a man who has just gotten a piece of good news on a Tuesday morning. I sat there a while. Then I pushed the call button and asked Priya if she could bring me a pen. I called the front office and requested a complete copy of my hospital and rehab file. All of it. Intake, nursing notes, the referral, the discharge plan. The woman asked what it was for. I said, "Insurance." And that was true. That was the first call. They let me out on Saturday the 25th. I drove myself home in a car I hadn't sat in for 2 weeks, and the seat was so hot through my shirt I had to put a towel down. Sunday morning I did 3 things. I got the cane out of the hall closet, Lorna's father's, hickory, brass ferrule, and I hadn't touched it since 2019. I got a cardboard box down from the garage shelf and put 6 of Lorna's cake pans in it, the tall ones with the collars, the ones Marlene used to sit on the counter and watch her grease. And I drove to Boyle's Smokehouse on Franklin Avenue with a stack of keys in my shirt pocket. The story I was telling was that I'd come to give back the spare keys and drop off some of her mother's things. The story was mostly true. That's how you tell one. I got there at 10:40. They open at 11. Dana let me in. She looked at the cane. She looked at my hand. The dressing was off by then, and it was pink and shiny, and the skin across the palm didn't move right. She said, "Hey, Mr. Osgood." She did not say, "How are you?" and I appreciated that more than I can tell you. I said, "Is Trent around?" "Dallas. Depositions start tomorrow." "How long?" 9 days. She said it the way you say a number you've already said 40 times. Him, Marlene, and Hector. Plaintiff's counsel scheduled it in blocks. 9 days. I put the box down on the end of the bar and said, "Well, these are your sister-in-law's grandmother's pans, more or less. Somebody ought to have them." Then I asked if I could sit a minute, because of the knee. She said, "Take your time," and went to do inventory. No. Understand that I had not been inside that kitchen in 4 years. I sat at the corner top by the ice machine, which happens to be the only seat in that building with a clean line of sight through the pass-through into the cook line. I sat there because of my knee. That's what I'd have told anybody who asked. Nobody asked. Here's what a hood suppression system is, in plain language, because it's the whole rest of this story. Over every commercial cook line in America, there's a metal hood. Inside that hood, there's a network of pipe with nozzles aimed down at the fryers and the grills and the char broiler. Behind it, usually in a cabinet on the wall, there's a tank of wet chemical agent under pressure. Grease fire starts, a fusible link melts, the tank dumps, the nozzles smother it, and the gas shuts off. That system has to be inspected and serviced twice a year by a licensed company, and when they do it, they hang a tag on the cylinder. Metal wire, folded card, punched holes for the month and the year, signature, license number. I have looked at 10,000 of those tags. I have built entire denials on them, so I'm sitting there with my knee out straight, and I'm looking at the cylinder on the wall inside the pass-through, and there's a yellow tag hanging off the neck of it, curling a little at the corner the way they do in kitchen heat. Punched, March 2026. Signature, license number, Brazos Fire and Safety, Hewitt, Texas, Phoenix. And then my eye went down about 4 inches, to the collar of the cylinder itself, where the lot number is stamped into the steel, 2605. I sat there for a second and let that be nothing. Then I stopped letting it be nothing. Wet chemical cylinders are lot stamped by the manufacturer, 2 digits for the year, 2 for the month of manufacture, 2605. May of 2026. That tag says a licensed technician inspected that cylinder in March. That cylinder came out of a factory in May. The tag on it is older than the tank it's hanging on. You cannot inspect a thing that does not exist yet. I'll tell you exactly what that means, because there are 2 possibilities, and only one of them is bad. Possibility 1, they had a cylinder discharged or condemned, replaced it in May, and the technician moved the old tag over instead of writing a new one. Sloppy. Happens. It's a violation, and it's not a crime. Possibility 2, somebody wrote that tag after May and punched March on it. And here is why possibility 2 is the end of a man's life. On the 9th of April, 2026, a 19-year-old kitchen hand named Emiliano Sandoval, everybody called him Milo, was working the char broiler at Boyle's Smokehouse when a grease fire came up out of the drip pan. The suppression system did not discharge. Milo put it out with his arms. 3rd-degree burns, both forearms, wrist to elbow. A tag, punched March 2026, is a tag that says the system was serviced and working 3 weeks before that fire. I did not touch the cylinder. I want to be clear about that, because everything I did from that point forward, I did knowing a lawyer might read it back to me someday. I took my phone out, a flip phone, and I've heard all the jokes, and I took 3 pictures from the seat I was sitting in. Tag, collar, wide shot, showing both on the same cylinder. Left-handed. 2 of them came out blurry. Then I did the thing that I think about most out of everything in this story. I called the manufacturer. Technical support line, printed right on the collar. I read them the lot number and asked when that cylinder shipped. Woman named Cheryl, and she was pleasant about it. 22 seconds of typing. That lot ran the 2nd week of May. Shipped out of our Ohio facility on the 19th. I thanked her. 3 minutes and 40 seconds, start to finish. And I wrote it on the back of my pharmacy receipt in ballpoint, left-handed, and my handwriting looked like a child's, and it did not matter one bit, because a 71-year-old man who is confused and unable to provide a consistent account does not read a 4-digit lot stamp off a steel collar from 11 feet away and then call Ohio. That was the first morning since the 12th of July that I felt like a person. The office at Boyle's is a partitioned corner of the back hall. 2x4 framing and 1/4-inch plywood, put up by whoever put it up in 2016. You can hear a phone vibrate through that wall. I did not have a recorder. I want to say that plainly. I never used one, not that day, and not any day after. What I had was a bad knee, a legitimate reason to be sitting where I was sitting, and 41 years of practice at listening to people who have forgotten you're in the room, Trent was on speaker from Dallas. Marlene was in there with the door shut. I heard about 90 seconds. I heard the number 340,000, and I heard Marlene say it twice, the second time with a rise at the end. I heard Trent say the word non-subscriber, and I heard Marlene ask what that meant, and I did not hear his answer because a truck went by on Franklin. And then I heard her say this, "What about the placement consultant?" And Trent said, "After the depots. Temple's got a bed." Temple is 35 miles south on Interstate 35. Placement consultant is what the industry calls a person who finds a facility bed and moves a body into it. I sat there with my hands on the top of a hickory cane, and I understood that my daughter had a bed reserved for me in another county. Dana came out with my empty box a few minutes later. She'd unpacked the pans into the back. She had something on top of the box. Canvas. Dark. One corner scorched black. Green thread on the cuff. Letter L. She said, "This was in the dumpster on the 16th. They redid the kitchen uniforms." I said, "You went in the dumpster." She said, "It was on top." She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the front window. Then she said one more thing, and it was the only thing she said in 9 days that mattered. "Mr. Osgood, whatever you're doing, I'm not going to tell anybody you were here." And she went back to her inventory. I sat in my car in that parking lot for 11 minutes with the air conditioning going and Lorna's oven mitt on my lap. I had 3 pictures, a lot number, a phone call to Ohio, a rehab file, and a burn across my palm running the wrong direction. I had 9 days. And I had one more thing, though it took me until Monday morning in the garage to remember I had it. Somewhere in a filing cabinet was a folder with my handwriting on the tab. 1114 Franklin, 2015. Monday morning I put a legal pad on the kitchen table, and I built the file. Not a revenge plan. A claim file. I've built 4,000 of them, and there is only one way I know how to do it, so that's how I did it. Cause, origin, coverage, exclusions, reserve. Cause is what happened. Origin is where it started, which is almost never where it happened. Coverage is what the paper actually says, as opposed to what everybody assumed it said. Exclusions are the reasons the paper doesn't have to pay. And the reserve is the number you write down on day 1, before you know anything because somebody upstairs needs a number. I wrote the word cause at the top of the first page, and under it I wrote, "Trent needs $340,000. And then I sat there for a long time, because I had cause and I did not have origin. It took me 2 days and 4 phone calls to get it. And I'm going to give it to you all at once instead of making you sit through the phone calls. On the 9th of April, Milo Sandoval got 3rd-degree burns on both forearms because a hood system didn't discharge. In most of this country, that is a workers' compensation claim. The kid gets his medical paid and a wage benefit. The employer's insurance handles it, and nobody sues anybody. That's the deal. Employer buys coverage, employee gives up the right to sue. Texas is the only state in the union where that coverage is optional. Here it's a choice, and if you choose not to carry it, you're what's called a non-subscriber. Trent dropped workers' comp in 2019, $19,000 a year, and he told his accountant it was money out the door. Now here's the part he did not understand when he signed that form, and I know he didn't understand it, because no man who understood it would have signed it. When you go non-subscriber in Texas, you don't just lose the shield. You give up the defenses. You cannot argue the employee was careless. You cannot argue a coworker caused it. You cannot argue he knew the job was dangerous and took it anyway. Every ordinary defense an employer has in this country, gone, by statute, because you chose not to buy the policy. All the Sandovals have to prove is that Boyle's Smokehouse was negligent in any degree at all. There is a tag hanging in that kitchen with the wrong date punched in it. That's not a lawsuit Trent Boyle was going to lose. That's a lawsuit that was already over on the 9th of April and just hadn't finished yet. Coverage. He had a commercial package policy, general liability, property, business interruption. He'd been carrying it 11 years. In May, the carrier rescinded it. Not canceled. Rescinded. Void from inception. Premium refunded, as if it had never been written. Carriers do that when there's a material misrepresentation on the application or in the loss report, and the thing they had was the tag. So, on the 9th of April, Trent had $2 million in liability coverage. By the end of May, he had none, and no property coverage either, and a 19-year-old's lawyer taking depositions. $340,000 was the demand. He had 60 days. Origin. I put my pen down when I got there. Because the origin of all of this was not greed. I have written that word in 1,000 files, and it was not the word. The word was cornered. A man is standing in a room, and the room is getting smaller, and there is one door, and the door is a 71-year-old widower who owns a paid-off house and doesn't need anything from anybody. That doesn't excuse a single thing that happened to me on the 12th of July. But it's the origin. And if you don't write down the true origin, the file's no good. Wednesday, Marlene came by from Dallas on an evening off to bring me a refill and check on the dressing. She stayed 40 minutes. She was decent to me. She made coffee in my kitchen, and she asked about the hand, and she told me a story about Cody losing a tooth. She hung her jacket on the back of a chair. When she went to the bathroom, I put 2 fingers in the outside pocket, and I want you to know that I'm not proud of it, and that I'd do it again. A trifold brochure. Riverbend Cottage. Memory Care and Secure Residential. Temple, Texas. Folded in 4. Lipstick mark on one corner where it had been in a purse with an open tube. Inside, in the margin next to the monthly rate, in my daughter's handwriting, ask about spend down. House. Spend down. That's the term for liquidating a person's assets to qualify them for long-term care assistance. The house was on the brochure. Not a threat, not a plot. A margin note, written while she was on the phone with somebody, in the same handwriting she uses on the grocery list. That was the moment it stopped being about a building. Up until that brochure, this was a story about a man who got shoved and lied about and pressured to sign papers, and those are terrible things, and I could have lived the rest of my life with all of them. A secure residential unit in Bell County is not a thing you live the rest of your life with. It's a thing you live the rest of your life in. I called Ruth Amador on Thursday. Ruth is 74. She spent 19 years as a felony prosecutor in the McLennan County District Attorney's Office. She retired in 2016, and she played bridge with Lorna every other Thursday for 20 years. She has a voice like a screen door. She came over. I put the whole file in front of her, in order, and I did not editorialize. She read it for 11 minutes without saying a word. Then she took her glasses off. Warren, Adult Protective Services. Today. And a lawyer tomorrow morning. I said no, and she got angry with me. And I'm going to give you all 3 of my reasons the way I gave them to her. Because if these 3 reasons don't hold, then everything I did after this is just a bitter old man burning his family down, and you'd be right to say so. 1. There is a police report in the system from the 12th of July that says I was confused and unable to provide a consistent account. If I walk into an Adult Protective Services office on Thursday and say my daughter is trying to have me committed, I am not contradicting that report. I am confirming it. That is what that report is for. It was built on that concrete for exactly this. Ruth said, "You have a burn pattern and a lot number." I said, "I have a burn pattern that requires 41 years of fire claims to read, and a lot number that requires the same." Ruth, who am I explaining that to? A caseworker with 60 open files, about a man his own daughter has already flagged as impaired. She didn't like it. But she didn't answer it either. Tfon. I signed a statutory durable power of attorney in room 214, and I want to be honest with you, that was the single worst thing I did in this entire story. I can revoke it. Any competent adult can revoke a power of attorney any day of the week. It takes 1 page, a notary, and a certified letter. That was never the problem. The problem is what happens the day after I revoke it. Ruth knew before I finished the sentence. She's the one who said the word. Guardianship. In Texas, under Chapter 1251 of the Estates Code, a court can appoint a temporary guardian on an emergency basis when there's evidence a person is at immediate risk. The hearing comes within 10 days. I would get a court-appointed attorney ad litem, and I would win. I want to be clear. With a doctor's evaluation and a decent ad litem, I'd win that hearing. But between the day they file and the day I win, I cannot sign anything. Not a deed, not a demand, not a letter. Every instrument I need is a signature, and the entire play is a signature. Ruth said, "So you're afraid of a filing you'd beat?" I said, "I'm not afraid of losing it. I'm afraid of the 90 days. 3. And this was the one that ended the argument. They were in Dallas until the 4th of August. Temple had a bed. Whatever the timeline had been, the brochure in that jacket was folded and marked, and it was not a first draft. The day I make one complaint, to Adult Protective Services, to a lawyer, to anybody who has to send a letter with my name on it, they will know, and they will file first, because the person who files first in a guardianship fight is the one the judge hears first. I did not have 6 weeks. I had 9 days, and 4 of them were gone. Ruth sat in my kitchen with her arms crossed for a good while. Then she said, I want it on the record that I think you're wrong. 30 years I told people to use the system. I'm not going to stop in your kitchen. Noted. You'll get a lawyer when this is over. I will. She picked up her purse. Then she put it back down. What do you actually have, Warren? And I said, I have 9 days and a filing cabinet. I went back to Franklin Avenue that night. I'm not going to dress it up. I parked on the side street, and I walked up the alley in the dark like a man half my age with a third of my sense, and I stood outside the office window with my hand on a hickory cane. The window unit was running, and under it there was maybe a 4-inch gap. Trent was back from Dallas for the night. He and Marlene were in there with the door shut. She said something I couldn't hear, and then Trent said this, and he said it slow, like a man who has been holding it in his mouth for 11 years. 11 years that building sat there with the windows papered over. 11 years, Marlene. He kept it like a church nobody was allowed to pray in. I pulled 40 pounds of grease out of that trap with my own hands. I slept on the office floor for 2 months. Every dollar in that place I put there, and he wants a plaque for the thing he didn't sell. He wants to be thanked for waiting. I stood in that alley in the dark, 98 degrees at 9 at night, and the brick still giving back the day's heat into my shoulder. And I'm going to tell you the truth, because I've told you everything else. He was right. Not about all of it. Not about the shove, not about the Norco bottle, not about a brochure with a lipstick mark on it. But about the building, he was right. I sat on that room for 4 years after Lorna closed it. 4 years of butcher paper on the windows, because I could not stand the idea of somebody else's name on that glass. He put $400,000 and 11 years of his life into a room I was keeping as a shrine, and I never once said thank you. I never said it. Not at the opening. Not at the Tribune Herald article. Not in 11 years. I walked back down that alley, and I sat in my car, and I could not start it for a while. Because a man can be owed something and still be the man who put his hand between your shoulder blades. Both things were true, and there was nowhere to put them. I drove home. Friday morning at 6, I went out to the garage, and I opened the 3rd drawer of the filing cabinet. The filing cabinet is a 4-drawer steel case I bought used in 1991. 3rd drawer, 2nd folder from the back, and my handwriting on the tab, in block letters, in a pen that ran out somewhere in the middle of the word Franklin. 1114 Franklin, 2015. I carried it inside, and put it on the kitchen table and made coffee, and did not open it for about 10 minutes. Because I knew what was in it and I wanted to be sitting down. Now, I have spent 41 years explaining insurance contracts to people at the worst moment of their lives. Kitchen tables, hospital rooms, hoods of cars. So I'm going to do it for you the way I do it for a policyholder, which means slowly and out loud and one clause at a time. The first thing in that folder is a warranty deed, dated the 14th of August, 2015. Warren J. Osgood to Marlene A. Boyle and Trent L. Boyle. Recorded that afternoon at the McLennan County Clerk's office on Washington Avenue. That deed is exactly what everybody thinks it is. I gave them the building. It's theirs. It has been theirs for 11 years, and it was theirs on the 12th of July when I was on my knees on that concrete. I want that understood, because everything else depends on it being true. I never took the building back. I never held anything back. I sold it to them. The second thing in that folder is a promissory note. $260,000, made by Marlene A. Boyle and Trent L. Boyle. Payable to Warren J. Osgood. Interest at 1% per annum. Payments of $412 a month, beginning the 1st of September, 2015. Balloon maturity, the 1st of September, 2045. 1%. Do you understand what 1% is? In 2015, a commercial building loan ran 5.5, 6. The bank would have wanted $60,000 down and a personal guarantee, and 2 years of tax returns from a man who had never run a restaurant. I wrote them a note at 1% for 30 years, and I told them not to worry about it. Those were my words, at that table, on Austin Avenue. Don't worry about the payments. And I meant something specific by it, and they heard something general. I meant, the payment is $412 a month, which is less than a car, and it will never go up, and if you ever miss one, I will not be the man who comes after you. They heard, it's a gift, and this is paperwork. I have thought about that sentence more than any other 5 words in my life. Both of us walked out of that title company believing we'd been perfectly clear. The third thing in that folder is the deed of trust. This is the part nobody in my family has ever read a line of, so pay attention, because this is the whole thing. A deed of trust is the security instrument. It's the document that says, if you don't pay the note, the lender can sell the property at auction to get his money back. It was recorded the same afternoon as the deed. Instrument number 2015-0024188, Official Public Records of McLennan County, Texas. I've had that number memorized since about the second week of August, and I'll have it memorized the day I die. It has been sitting on the title of 1114 Franklin Avenue, in public, in the county records, in a building you can walk into on a Tuesday, for 11 years. Any title company in Texas finds it in under 4 minutes. Here are the clauses. Paragraph 9. Borrower shall maintain property insurance on the improvements in an amount not less than the unpaid principal balance, naming lender as loss payee, and shall furnish lender with a certificate of insurance annually. Standard. It's in every seller finance note in this country. It means, don't let my collateral burn down uninsured. Paragraph 12. Borrower shall not create or permit any lien, mortgage, or encumbrance upon the property, whether senior or junior to this instrument, without the prior written consent of lender. Also standard. Due on encumbrance. It means, don't stack debt on the thing that's securing my money. Paragraph 15. Upon default, lender may declare the entire unpaid principal balance, together with accrued interest, immediately due and payable, and may invoke the power of sale. Acceleration. That's the word. That's the whole machine, in one word. Not, I can take a payment. Not, I can charge a fee. The entire balance. At once. Now let me tell you what my son-in-law did in June. On the 19th of June, 2026, Marlene and Trent Boyle borrowed $180,000 from a hard money lender out of Round Rock at 22%, secured by a second lien on 1114 Franklin Avenue. Recorded. Public. 4 minutes. That's paragraph 12. That is a default the day the ink dried. And in the last week of May, the carrier rescinded the policy on that building, void from inception. Which means the property insurance required by paragraph 9 has not existed since the 9th of April, and I was never named loss payee at all, and no certificate has been furnished to me in 11 years, because nobody knew there was anybody to furnish one to. That's paragraph 9. 2 defaults. And then there's the $412. Trent set that transfer up in September of 2015, out of the restaurant operating account, and he has never looked at it again. Marlene books it. She books it every month as dad. Taxes. 132 consecutive payments. Do you know what 132 consecutive payments does? It means the note is not stale. It means there is no statute of limitations argument, no laches, no abandonment, no he sat on it too long. The maturity date is 2045. We are 19 years from the finish line. That note is not old paper. That note is current, performing, and in default on 2 separate covenants. They have been servicing my loan for 11 years and calling it a favor to their father. Principal balance, as of the 1st of September, 2026, $232,676.41. I ran the amortization 3 times on a legal pad because I don't trust anything I only did twice. $232,676.41. I sat back in that chair, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt something closer to what I feel at the end of a long file, when the number finally comes out clean and you know you're going to have to call somebody and tell them. Then I got out a calendar off the wall, the free one from the credit union, and I turned it over and wrote on the back, because you plan on the back of a calendar when you're 71. 9 days. Monday the 27th. Revoke the power of attorney. I want to explain this one, because it looks backwards. I told Ruth that revoking the power of attorney was the thing that would set them off. That's true. But an unrevoked power of attorney is a loaded gun sitting in Dallas with my daughter's name on it, and I had a payoff demand to file, and the last thing I needed was a woman with financial authority calling a title company about her father's affairs. So I revoked it on the Monday morning of the deposition block, notarized at the UPS store on Valley Mills, recorded at the county clerk's office, certified mail, return receipt, to Marlene, to Trent, to my bank, to the title company, and to Cedar Ridge. Every one of those letters landed in a mailbox nobody was going to open until the 4th of August. The alarm went off in an empty house. Tuesday, county clerk. Certified copies of the deed of trust, and the June 2nd lien. $3 a page, and worth every dollar. Wednesday, carrier. Written confirmation of the rescission date and a copy of the notice they sent Trent. Thursday, file the payoff demand. Send the notice of default and intent to accelerate, certified, to the address on the note. Friday, appointment of substitute trustee, recorded. A real estate attorney on Austin Avenue named Farrow, who I met for 40 minutes and who asked me 2 questions and then did his job. And underneath all of that, running the whole 9 days, was the other thing. The part I don't much like telling. I kept it up. I took the cane into the county clerk's office. I did not need the cane by the 27th. I took it anyway, and I let a young woman at the records counter walk around the desk to help me carry 3 pieces of paper. I called Donna twice on the phone. On Sunday, I let Marlene do the pill organizer over video call from a hotel room in Dallas, the way she'd done every Sunday since the hospital. She held up each bottle to the camera, and I said, "Yes, that's the one." And she moved it into the little compartment, and she asked me twice whether I was sleeping all right. And I kept the cardboard box on the kitchen table where the camera could see it. Lorna's recipe cards, still in it. Marlene never once asked what was in the box. I ran that camera call for 11 minutes with a notice of default sitting face down under a placemat 18 inches to my left. I'm not going to tell you that felt good. Friday the 31st, Farrow's office called to say the substitute trustee appointment was recorded. I hung up the phone and I sat in the kitchen, and I picked it back up and made one more call. Calder Mutual, my old employer, the claims service line, which I could dial before I could drive. I asked one question. When exactly did the policy on 1114 Franklin Avenue lapse? The woman at Calder Mutual put me on hold for 90 seconds and came back with a date. Rescinded effective April 9th, 2026. Notice mailed May 22nd. Premium refunded. April 9th. Not the day they sent the letter. The day of the fire. Void from inception means the policy is treated as though it never existed, and they backed it to the lost date. I said thank you, and asked her to send it in writing. Then I sat there and did the thing you do at the end of a file, which is put it all in one line and see if it holds. Since the 9th of April, there has been no insurance on my collateral, and a second lien on my collateral, and 132 payments on my note. It held. Now I have to tell you about the title company. And to do that, I have to tell you what Trent was actually trying to do in July, because I didn't understand it until Thursday morning, and it changed how I felt about all of it. He wasn't refinancing to buy a boat. Here's the arithmetic. That building appraised at $560,000 this spring. Not the $260,000 I sold it for in 2015. 560. 11 years of build-out, a smoker line, a walk-in, a patio he poured himself, and a name people in 3 counties know. He was $300,000 of that appraisal, not me. He'd applied for a new first lien loan of $448,000, 80% of value. The proceeds were going to do 2 things. Pay off the hard money note at 22%, which with fees and prepayment was going to run him about $187,000, and leave roughly $255,000 to put down on a structured settlement with the Sandovals. That was the play. That was the whole thing. He wasn't running. He was trying to pay a 19-year-old kid for his arms with the only asset he had. And that arithmetic only works if the lien from 2015 comes off the title. That's what the third document in room 214 was. That's why he set it down last and kept 2 fingers on the corner of it. Every dollar of that man's future ran through a piece of paper he needed a 71-year-old with a burned hand to sign. I want to be careful here, because I've had a year to think about it, and I've had people tell me both things. If I sign that release, the loan closes, the Sandovals get a down payment, the hard money man gets paid, Boyle's Smokehouse stays open, and about 4 weeks later a placement consultant moves me into a secure unit in Temple, and my house goes on the market to fund the spend down. That's not a guess. That was written in a margin in my daughter's handwriting. There was never a version of that release where I sign it and go home. Thursday the 30th, 10 in the morning. I called the title company on Austin Avenue and asked for the escrow officer handling the Boyle file. Her name was Kendra. I said, "This is Warren Osgood. I'm the lien holder of record under instrument number 2015-0024188. You've been waiting on a release from me. I'm not sending a release. I'm sending a payoff demand. $232,676.41, good through the 15th of August, plus per diem." There was a pause on that line of about 4 seconds. Then, to her credit, she said, "Sir, can you send that on letterhead with a copy of the note and a payoff statement?" I said I could have it there by 2. I had it there by noon, and Farrow's office sent the notice of default and intent to accelerate, certified mail, return receipt, to Marlene A. Boyle and Trent L. Boyle, at the address on the note, that same afternoon. 10 days to cure. Sent Thursday the 30th. Cure period runs out Monday the 10th of August. Write that date down. Now, here's where it went wrong. I had built 9 days around one assumption, and the assumption was that a deposition block is a sealed room. It is not. There are breaks. At 12:40 on Thursday, Kendra at the title company did exactly what a competent escrow officer is supposed to do when a family lien turns into a payoff demand. She called the borrower to verify, and Trent Boyle, in a hallway on the 14th floor of a building in Dallas with a sandwich in his hand, picked up. I found out at 1:15. My phone buzzed, and it was a number I didn't have, and it was 4 words. He knows about a payoff. Donna. First message she ever sent me in her life. She'd have gotten it from Marlene, who'd have gotten it from Trent in about 90 seconds, because that's how a family with a problem works. I stood in my kitchen and I want to describe what that felt like accurately. It wasn't panic. It was the specific cold that comes over you when you've built something for 9 days and you can see the exact bolt that's about to shear. If Trent got a real answer out of that title company on Thursday afternoon, he had 11 days of cure period, and a lawyer, and every reason in the world. He goes to a judge Friday morning. He files for emergency temporary guardianship of a confused 71-year-old man who is making unauthorized demands against his own family's property. And he would have been believed. There was a police report that said so. I called Kendra back at 1:40, and I used the only thing I had, which was the thing they'd spent 5 weeks building. I'm not going to pretty this up. I did the voice. I let it wander. I started a sentence about the note and ended it somewhere else. I apologized twice for taking her time. I asked her to repeat something she'd already said clearly. I told her my son-in-law had asked me for the release for their anniversary, that it was supposed to be a surprise, that Marlene didn't know, that I'd gotten mixed up with the paperwork and sent the wrong thing, and that I was embarrassed about it. And then I asked her, please, not to bring it up with them again because it would spoil it. Kendra was gentle with me. That's the part. She was kind and patient, and she said, "Of course, Mr. Osgood, don't you worry about it." And she made a note in the file. I've seen it since. It reads, "Borrower's father, elderly, do not contact regarding lien, family matter." The payoff demand stayed in the file, untouched, fully executed, sitting there under a note that said, "Don't call this man about it." When Trent called her that afternoon, and he did, at 4:11, she told him the old man had gotten confused about some paperwork, and it was being sorted out, which was true, from where she sat, which is the whole problem. I hung up that phone and I sat down on a kitchen chair and I stayed there for maybe 20 minutes without turning a light on. I had just taken the lie my daughter told a police officer on the 12th of July, and I had used it as a tool. I made a young woman doing her job feel sorry for a man who was not confused. I want to be honest with you, because you've come this far with me. That is the worst thing I did. Not the foreclosure. The foreclosure was a contract. That phone call was a performance, and it worked because a decent person on the other end had been raised to be kind to old men. I don't have a way to square it. I've stopped trying to. Ruth came by Saturday with a manila envelope and a jar of pickles she'd made, because that's who she is. She'd read everything, and she asked me the one question I'd been avoiding since Wednesday. Warren, if you foreclose, what happens to that boy? I'd worked it out 3 times on the legal pad. I gave it to her the way I'd worked it out. There's roughly $147,000 of equity in that building above my note. In theory, that equity is money the Sandovals could someday collect against. 3 things. 1. The hard money man from Round Rock at 22% is standing in front of them in line, and he was standing there in June. Before I knew any of this existed, that equity was already spoken for. 2. Boyle's Smokehouse is a non-subscriber with no liability coverage and a demand for $340,000. There is not enough building in Texas to cover that. Even if I walked away and signed the release, the Sandovals were getting a down payment and a promise from a man with no insurance. 3. And this is the one that matters. I had already sent the tag. On the 28th of July, 2 days before the payoff demand. And I want that order to be clear because I checked it against the certified mail receipts before I told Ruth and before I told you. I sent everything to the Sandoval's attorney in Waco. 3 photographs. The lot number. My handwritten note of the call to the manufacturer, with Cheryl's name and the time, and a 4-page affidavit signed by a man with a CPCU and 41 years of fire claims, explaining what a lot stamp is and why a cylinder cannot be inspected in March if it's shipped in May, which puts a licensed inspection company called Brazos Fire and Safety into that lawsuit. Brazos Fire and Safety carries $2 million of professional liability. They didn't inspect that hood in March. They sold Trent a signed tag, and I'd bet the house on Bosque Boulevard they've sold 200 more. The kid's money was never in that building. The kid's money was hanging on a wire off the neck of a cylinder, and it had been hanging there since May. Ruth listened to all of it. Then she said, "You worked that out before or after you decided to foreclose?" And I said, "Before." She said, "Good." And she didn't say anything else about it. And I noticed that she didn't tell me I was a good man, and I noticed that I'd been waiting to hear it. At the door, she said, "I still think you're wrong." I said I knew. She said, "I'll be there anyway." They flew back Tuesday, the 4th of August. Marlene called me that evening. She was warm. She asked about the hand. She said the depositions had been brutal, and she didn't want to talk about it. Then she said the reopening was Saturday, 11 o'clock. Ribbon, the Chamber of Commerce, KWTX sending somebody. She said, "Dad, I want you there. I mean it. It matters to me." And I said I'd be there. And then I asked her whether I should bring anything. Saturday, the 8th of August. 103 degrees at 11 in the morning, and the sky over Franklin Avenue was that flat white it gets in August when there's nothing in it at all. Red ribbon across the front doors. Folding chairs on the sidewalk. A man from the Chamber of Commerce with oversized scissors and a lanyard. A girl from KWTX, maybe 26, with a shoulder rig and a microphone flag, and a producer behind her checking her phone. 60 people. Half of them had been at the party on the 12th of July. They'd set the big smoker out front on the sidewalk, doors open, and it was running, brisket at 250 and a full load of post oak. Not the char broiler. The Southern Pride. Same one. They'd polished it. I got there at 10 past 11. I did not bring a cane. I want you to see this the way the people on those folding chairs saw it, because I planned every piece of it and I'm not going to pretend I didn't. For 5 weeks they had seen a man with a hickory cane and a wrapped hand who shuffled and got names wrong and had to be helped with 3 sheets of paper at a records counter. I parked on Franklin and I walked up the sidewalk in a white shirt and a tie, and I did not shuffle, because I had not needed to shuffle since the 22nd of July. My right hand was bare. 5 weeks of healing on a 2nd-degree palm burn leaves you with skin that's pink and tight and shines in direct sun. At 103 degrees, in white August light, on a sidewalk, that hand was the brightest thing on the block. I carried 1 manila folder. Trent saw me from the ribbon and his whole face opened up. That's the part I wasn't ready for. He was glad. He came down off the step and he took my left hand in both of his and he said, "Hey, you made it." And he meant it, because in his arithmetic, I was the man who was about to sign a release on Monday and make everything survivable, and he'd have hugged a lamppost that morning. Marlene came over and put her arm through mine. She said, "Dad, stand up here with us." And I said, "I'll watch from here." My knee. The chamberman said some words. Trent took the microphone. He talked for about 3 minutes, and it was a good speech, and I'm going to give you the middle of it because it's the last honest thing that happened that morning. He said this building was standing empty when he got here, papered over, and that a family gave it to him, and that he'd put every dollar and every hour he had into it, and that he wanted to say something people don't say enough. He said, "This room was Lorna Osgood's bakery for 32 years. He said, "I never met her, but everybody in Waco over 60 knows what came out of this room, and I've spent 11 years trying to be worth the address." 60 people applauded. I stood on that sidewalk in the heat with a manila folder in my left hand, and my wife's name came out of that man's mouth in front of a television camera, and it landed on me like a board, because he meant that too. He meant every word of it, on the same morning that a placement consultant in Temple had a bed with my name on it. I have had a year to make those two things fit together, and they do not fit, and I've come to believe they're not supposed to. People are not one thing. That's not a comfort. It's just true. They cut the ribbon. Then Trent said, "Everybody come around. We're pulling the first brisket off," and 60 people got up off folding chairs and moved toward the smoker on the sidewalk, which is where I was standing. I hadn't planned that. I'd planned everything else, and I had not planned that the crowd would come to me. I didn't say anything. I want that on the record, because people have asked me what I said, and the answer is nothing. I reached into my shirt pocket and took out the tag. Yellow cardstock, 4 inches by 2, one corner curled from a year in kitchen heat, the twist of wire still on it. Brazos Fire and Safety punched at March 2026. Dana had cut it off the cylinder Thursday night and handed it to me in the parking lot of the HEB on Valley Mills without one word passing between us in either direction. I hung it on the handle of that smoker. Then I set the manila folder down on the prep table beside the sauce, and I stepped back about 4 feet. And I waited. The first man to open it wasn't family. There was a fellow there in a golf shirt who'd driven down from Round Rock for free brisket and to shake his borrower's hand on a good day. He was standing closest to the table. He opened it because it was there. 2 pages in, he stopped chewing. He read maybe 40 seconds more. Then he walked off the sidewalk, across Franklin, out to the far end of the lot with his phone at his ear and his other hand on top of his head. He never came back. His truck was gone before anybody thought to look. Trent picked it up next, still smiling, because he thought it was catering paperwork. I watched him read. Notice of default and intent to accelerate. Appointment of substitute trustee, recorded, file stamped. Certified copy of the deed of trust, instrument number 2015-0024188. Certified copy of the second lien, recorded the 19th of June. Rescission notice from Calder Mutual, effective April 9th, and a payoff statement. He got to the number and his mouth moved. Then he laughed. 1 syllable, up in his throat. He said, "Warren, this is nothing." He said it loud. "For the people nearest us. That lien's dead. That's a 2015 piece of paper. Nobody's owed anything on that. He gave us this building." And I said the only sentence I said to that man that morning. 132 payments. He said, "What?" $412. The first of every month. Since September of 2015, 132 of them. I have watched a lot of people receive bad news. It's most of what my job was. There's a specific thing that happens, and it's not in the face first. It's the hands. Trent Boyle was holding a file-stamped county document in both hands, and his fingers went loose on it, and the pages fanned, and he caught them against his chest with his forearm, like a man catching a plate. He said, That's the taxes." He looked at Marlene. He said it to her, not to me. "That's the taxes, right? That's the property taxes." My daughter had her phone out. She'd already opened it. She's the bookkeeper. She opened the ledger, the way you check a thing you're certain about. I watched her find the line. "Dad, taxes, $412. And then I watched her scroll. She scrolled up through July, through June, May, April, through 2025. Through 2023, the year her mother died, when she made 12 of those payments during the worst 5 months of her life and never looked at one of them. She scrolled for a long time. You could hear the smoker ticking. She got to September of 2015 and it stopped and there was nothing above it, and she stood on that sidewalk in front of a television camera holding a phone she couldn't put down. She said, "Dad." She said, "Dad, what is this?" And I said, "That's a note, Marlene. That's what a note looks like when you pay it." Dana walked past all of us and shut down the smoker, killed the burn, closed the intake, dropped the doors. That's all she did. She didn't look at her brother and she didn't look at me. The yellow tag was still hanging on the handle, and it swung a little when the door closed and then it stopped. 60 people were quiet in a way 60 people almost never are. The girl from KWTX had her camera up. She'd had it up for a while. Marlene came at me and took hold of my sleeve. Not hard. She got 2 fingers in the cuff. She said, "Fix this." She said, "Dad, you can fix this. Call them, please." And I said, "There's a 10-day cure. It runs Monday. Then we'll pay it. $232,676.41 and proof of property insurance by Monday the 10th. That's the cure. It's real. If you can do it, it's over." And I go home. She stood there. Because she knew, and I knew, and Trent standing 3 feet away knew, that the only money on earth that could have cured that note was a $448,000 refinance that could not close while my lien sat on the title. They had 48 hours and a door that was standing open. That's worse. I know it's worse. I wanted her to have the door. And that's when my daughter said the one thing I had no answer for. She let go of my sleeve. She said, "You didn't come when Cody was born." I said, "Marlene, you sent a check and a card, and the card had your secretary's handwriting on it. 60 people, a camera." She was right. She was right about all of it. March of 2017, I was in Lubbock on a fire loss, a 3rd-generation grain operation that burned to the slab, and I sent Dorothy to the Hallmark on Bosque, and I signed a card she'd already written, and I put $400 in it, and I got to that hospital 2 days late, and told myself the file couldn't wait. The file could have waited. That's the thing nobody tells you about being the man who never misses work. Every single hour of it came out of somebody. I stood on that sidewalk in 103 degrees, and I let it be true for 3 full seconds in front of everybody. Then I said what I'd come to say. "That's true. That one's mine and I'll carry it. But today I'm not your father, Marlene. Today, I'm the lien holder. Come back to me when you can tell those two apart." I took my hand out of her reach, and I walked through the crowd toward my car. Nobody said anything to me. A woman I've known since 1981 put her hand out and touched my arm as I went by and took it back. The ribbon was still hanging across those doors in 2 red pieces where the chamberman had cut it, and the ends were moving in the heat coming up off the sidewalk. Nobody had gone inside. There was 140 pounds of brisket sitting in a smoker with the fire out. The notice went up on the courthouse door the following Tuesday, the 11th of August, at 7 in the morning, posted, filed with the county clerk, and mailed certified to both of them 21 days before the sale. I wasn't there when it went up. Nobody I love was there to see it. I found out because Pharaoh's office called me at 9:40 and read me the file stamp over the phone, and I said thank you, and I hung up, and I stood in my kitchen for a while. Then I went out to the garage and put the folder back in the 3rd drawer, because that is where it goes. The first Tuesday in September, 2026. 10 in the morning, south steps of the McLennan County Courthouse. 9 people there. 2 of them were bidders. One was a man who comes every month with a thermos and takes notes on properties he has no intention of buying, and I've since learned his name is Odell, and he's been doing it since 1994. Pharaoh read the notice out loud. It takes about 4 minutes. When he opened the bidding, I bid the debt. A secured lender can do that. I didn't have to bring money. I had a note. I bid $232,676.41, and then I bid $11 more, and I handed Pharaoh's clerk a 10 and a 1 out of my wallet. Nobody raised me. It took under 6 minutes, and it was the least dramatic thing that has ever happened to me. People ask about the $11, and they want it to be a message. It isn't. A credit bid that comes in exactly at the debt leaves a trustee's accounting with nothing in it. $11 over creates a surplus, which means there's a real deposit, a real ledger, and a distribution the trustee has to account for in writing. It closes the file clean. That surplus went where the law says it goes, which is down the chain to the next lien holder in line. The man from Round Rock lent $180,000 at 22% in June. I'm not going to characterize what he received. You can do the arithmetic as well as I can. The rest of it came apart over about 90 days, and I'll keep it short, because none of it was interesting to watch. The $448,000 refinance never closed. There was nothing to refinance. The Sandoval suit is still pending, but Brazos Fire and Safety was added as a defendant in September, and they carry $2 million of professional liability, and their carrier is not going to take that to a jury with a lot number stamped on a cylinder in evidence. The State Fire Marshal's Office, which is a division of the Texas Department of Insurance, opened a file on Brazos in October. There were, at last count, more than 200 tags. I gave a deposition in that matter in November. 4 hours. They asked me twice whether I had any difficulty recalling dates. I said no. Marlene filed for divorce on the 9th of November. Dana gave a statement to the fire marshal's investigators, on her own, without being subpoenaed, in the first week of October. She'd known about the tag since April. She'd known for 4 months, and she went to work every day and carried plates. She told me later she'd started 3 letters to Milo's mother and finished none of them. She's a manager at a place out on Bosque now. We speak. Milo Sandoval had his 3rd skin graft in February. He has about 60% range in his left wrist and a little more in the right, and he is going to have those arms for the rest of his life. I went to see him once, at the hospital, in September. I didn't tell anybody I was going. I'm not good at hospital rooms. I've stood in a lot of them with a clipboard, and that's a different thing entirely. And I found out in about 4 minutes that without the clipboard I don't know what to do with my hands. His mother was there. Her name is Alicia, and she cleans 2 office buildings on Waco Drive. I didn't make a speech. I want to be clear that there was no speech. I put 2 things on the table by the bed. The first was Lorna's oven mitt, canvas, 1 corner burned black, green L on the cuff. I told him a woman named Lorna Osgood wore that in that building for 32 years and never took a burn worse than a blister, and that it wasn't worth anything, and that he should have it anyway. The second was 1 page. A lease. Ground floor. 1114 Franklin Avenue. 4,200 square feet. Tin ceiling. 1 oven. $1 a year, 10 years. Renewable. Effective whenever his arms are ready and not 1 day before. His mother read it twice. Then she asked me why. And I did not have a good answer for her, so I gave her the true one, which is that I was 71 years old and I owned an empty building for the 2nd time in my life, and I had already found out what I'm like when I keep one. Marlene was at the courthouse that Tuesday. She stood at the bottom of the steps in the shade of the live oak on the Washington Avenue side. She didn't come up and she didn't say anything. I came down those steps and I walked past my daughter and I went to my car. I've been asked whether that was hard. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I include February of 2023 in that, and I'll tell you why. Turning around would not have been weakness. That's what people think I mean. It wasn't a temptation to be weak. It was that I knew exactly what would happen if I turned around, because I've known her since 1988. She'd have cried, and I'd have held her. And by Thursday there'd have been a conversation about the building, and by the following month there'd have been a number, and every bit of that would have felt like love while it was happening. I got in the car and I drove home on Washington with the air conditioning going. In October, Dana brought Cody over on a Saturday. She asked me first. She didn't ambush me with it. 9 years old. He'd lost a tooth and grown about 2 inches, and he wanted to know why my hand was pink. I told him I burned it on a grill. He asked if it hurt. I said it did. He said, "Was it dumb?" And I said yes, it was pretty dumb, and he seemed satisfied with that. And then he ate 2 pieces of a cake I made out of his grandmother's card for buttermilk pound cake, which I had never made in my life, and which came out heavy on one side. He comes about twice a month now. Marlene knows. That took some doing, and I'm not going to pretend it's fixed. She and I have spoken 4 times since the courthouse. Twice it was about Cody. Once it was about her mother's pans. The 4th time, she asked me whether I would have signed the release if she'd asked me herself, without Trent in the room, without a notary, without the party. I told her the truth, which is that I don't know. She said that was fair. That's where we are. I'm not going to sell you a reconciliation. Some things take longer than a story does. So here's what I've got. The lesson isn't, don't trust your children. I'm not going to stand here and tell a room full of people to be afraid of their own kids, because that's a poison and I've watched it eat people from the inside. Here's the lesson. The paperwork you sign while you're strong is your voice on the day somebody decides you're confused. I could not get a police officer to finish one sentence with me. I could not have walked into an agency office and been believed. My own signature on a power of attorney was used against me inside of 9 days. But a piece of paper filed at the county clerk's office on the 14th of August, 2015, at 4 in the afternoon, does not get tired, and does not slur, and does not have a bad knee, and cannot be told it's confused. So read what you sign. Keep the copy. Keep it somewhere you can find it in the dark. And whatever you do, don't ever let somebody else hold the pen. I still think about the word. Every morning I take the lid off a pill bottle with a right hand that doesn't fully close, and it takes me about 4 seconds. And 4 seconds is a specific amount of time to me now. And every morning, somewhere in those 4 seconds, I hear my daughter say selfish. I've turned it over about 300 times, and I'll tell you where I've landed, which is not where I expected to land. I don't think she was entirely wrong. I sat on that room for 4 years with butcher paper on the windows. I sent a card with somebody else's handwriting in it. I was a man who never missed a day of work, and I have finally understood that every one of those days was subtracted from somebody, and I never once asked who was paying. She was wrong about the 12th of July. She was wrong about the Norco, and about April, and about a brochure with a lipstick mark on it. But she wasn't wrong about all of it. I just wish she'd told me at a kitchen table. If you've got a kitchen table and somebody you've been meaning to say something to, go do that instead. It's cheaper than what this cost. Tell me in the comments if you've ever had to choose between being right and being forgiven. I'm still not sure I chose correctly. Thanks for staying with me.